Hey, welcome to another episode of the Curious Midlife Podcast. And I am delighted to have best-selling author, movement expert, movement educator, the lady whose name comes up more than anybody else's when I ask people like, who do you follow? What work do you do? Like, who have your influences been? So yeah, really happy to introduce, welcome, and really excited to talk to Katy Bowman. So welcome, Katy.
Hello, thank you for having me.
No, thank you. So I'm going to get straight into it because there's a lot I want to cover. So you have just recently released another book in your series of great books, and this one is called Rethink Your Position. So for people who aren't familiar with your work, and there's a really coherent kind of string of thoughts and values and motivations behind your work that you do. Can you just give a brief summary of like, what's the why of your work currently and the themes that you address in all of your books?
Oh geez, right, so many books because it's so hard to sum up. Um, in general, my position is helping people move move not only more often, but move more parts of their body. And about 10 years ago, maybe even a little bit more than that, I realized that our understanding of movement was really hedged in by this concept of exercise. And it was the psychology of what we thought movement was that was keeping so many people from getting the movement that they needed. So it's when I started saying, exercise is just one small type of movement, and it might be the hardest to get out of all the other movements. And so let me show you one, what a movement rich lifestyle looks like to see all the different ways that movement fits in. Also, it's looking at the reasons that people aren't able to move, the barriers to movement. And they are vast. They go all the way from the socioeconomical barriers to the physical barriers. This body part doesn't articulate. And when I try to move my body more, it hurts. So I really keep my work needle working on trying to hit all those targets. Like I don't have a single target. If there was a single target, it would be to create a framework or a world view of movement that once you could see the framework overlay on your life, on not just your body, but on your life, on your community, and even on the broader culture at large, once you could see movement clearly, like think matrix and all those zeros and ones dropping, but they're all movement related. And there's different frameworks on top of those. But just when we think about how movement is working in the world, once you can see it, then you can pick and choose your movement with greater ease. Hone in for your particular body what you need to do to get the movement you need in your life.
I love this. And this whole idea you talk about as well. And I was first introduced to the phrase movement culture by it was a German sociologist called Henning Eichberg, and he wrote about movement cultures 30, 40 years ago. And it was about this move to be beyond exercise, beyond sport, and of how and it's been, become popularized now, this phrase of like natural movement, or going back to this kind of ancestral health paradigm, these kind of primitive ways of movement and the needs we have. And something I really love in your work is that, you talk about these, about creating a movement culture, and a movement culture really is about, our attitudes, our beliefs, our values, our behaviors. And one thing I love as well is that this idea that we actually have far more control over how our body feels and what it can do than most people realize. And there's also a really comic tone to your book, which I really enjoyed. Like there's a very everyday language and this need to talk about movement in a different way. It's like we're missing the vocabulary as well, because you're a full science geek nerd. You could add the ologies and the itis and
Sure.
to the end of everything. And I think it's really that these bigger outcomes come from the everyday conversations, and to take it to not just stay within, the kind of academic ivory towers or the peer-reviewed papers, which all have their role, but to go to like, well, what do I tell Uncle Fred, who's like, his knee hurts and my mum's moaning about her back, or Doris down the road has got a bad foot and she's never really managed to sort it out, and all of those things. So you said something which I actually want to jump to like the end of the book, because the book goes through this wonderful, almost, kind of like top down, head to toe way of, we can align ourselves in these ways and we can feel really differently. And but then also it's probably like our mind that is the thing that's stopping us from breaking this cycle of the only option is exercise. I hurt, doing that hurts even more. So why would I be going towards doing a thing that brings me pain? It's not joyful. And you give this story of a runner running next to you, and you say, when I'm not constantly thinking about how much I hate running, it's so much easier. Mm-hmm. And this was just and I just wrote, you like, same. Mm-hmm. And so as a biomechanist, we hear a lot about the parts and the levers and all of those things, but you also present a really strong case, which I love, of how everything is connected here. So can you share kind of the importance of why that is in here for you and your own experiences of that?
The mental piece.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Well, I don't think we tend to think we separate the physical benefits of movement from the mental benefits of movement. So it was really important for me to present the brain and mind as a part on the list, along with the knees and the hips and the brain and the shoulders and the pelvic floor, to integrate it there. And then also, yes, that mental part can be the part that is the least flexible. We've got thoughts are like repetitive movements, and it's hard to move outside of that pattern in which you're moving. It's hard to think outside of the pattern with which you're thinking. And so I recently just put something on my own, because I'm working on a psychology movement project. And I was just curious, like, how would you state what your barriers are to movement? And so many of them are internal barriers. And many times, even the things that we perceive as external barriers, the things that we see, we just can't physically move around, have an internal component, which isn't to say that all of our issues are in our mind, but the mindset that you bring to something affects your experience of it. And so I was sharing my own experience of, I'm a pretty robust mover now. I'm 47. And everyone often, and which is common with movement teachers, is movement teachers tend to have always been active, right? They didn't have to go through the process of not liking movement to liking movement. Mm-hmm. They came from a family that prioritized and was movement centric. They were supported in dance. They had money for lessons. They were driven around for sports. And not everyone fits into that mold. And so what I really realized is most movement teachers are coming from the perspective of, they almost have an ignorance to what it's like to be someone who has had negative experiences around movement, other physical issues that have made movement difficult. And so it was really important for me to share my journey from being someone who was not a mover to someone who cultivated a personal within myself, within a family, and within a community, have created this movement through line, beginning with the psychological shift in myself. And I could have led with that, but I don't think people picking up a book about rethinking their their position and working on knee pain and shoulder pain would appreciate right off the bat this idea that the mind was in the way. Like, you've already made a mental shift when you picked up the book. When you pick up a tool, you have already acknowledged somewhere in yourself, there's a solution out there for me. So if you're seeking a solution, you have already this flexibility of mind that it's out there somewhere. And then you read something like, sit on the floor instead of chairs. You're like, whoa, I'm back to inflexible
Radical.
again. Right. And then I explain it a little bit more with the lever muscle culture argument that can get in logically. You rationalize your way to be like, okay, I can see that that's not as far out of the box. So like, that's why it's in there, and that's why it needs to be in there. And it could be in the front. But again, I think that sometimes we need to put things in the back door. We need to sneak around a little bit.
Oh, 100%, 100%. And this theme of these, the barriers to participation, it's something like, with my background in parkour, I look at a lot and talk to people a lot. And this difference between those who have this maybe like very high kinetic intelligence as well. I have friends who are self-taught gymnasts who literally watch something and then they can replicate the movement. And then people like me, I'm a very, very slow learner. And in my own movement journey, when I was, I sat down for 20 years, I was active teenager, stopped at 16, no conscious decision, just life. And then at 35 was surrounded by people who moved in this incredibly inspiring, superhero-like dynamic way. And then, one of my coaches, and it really changed for me as well when I had a female parkour coach, because my level of physical empathy was so high versus having a female say to me, okay, Julie, run and kick this wall and kind of go up it. Because when a guy asked me to do that, I was just like, well, yeah, that's all right for you. Like,
sure. All the stories.
Yeah. But then, and also when I went to do it, it was like, there was not one cell in my body that wanted to kick up this wall. It was like, that's insane. Why would I run and kick a wall? That's hurt. That's pain. That's a recipe for disaster. And then seeing that same coach at a workshop, and there was another lady who I recognized as that was me a couple of years ago, going like, I can't do that. Like, just blank, like, no. And this coach was like, I can't relate to that. I can't relate to those fears. I can't relate. And I was like, I've got this. Like, I've got this. I've been scared of everything. And to unlearn is so much harder than learning. And then how we get that first step in, that entry level. So with regards to the alignment, can you give just a really beautiful, concise piece of clarity for people around these phrases that we hear that a lot of people are really confused about? Mobility versus flexibility and stability. What are your definitions for these?
Well, mobility is the range of motion of a joint. Flexibility is the range of motion of a tissue, muscle. So it's like the difference between a strain and a sprain is not the degree of injury, it's what type of tissue are you talking about. So a strain and a degree of strain, light to hard, or full separation. A strain is tendons, and a sprain is an injury to the muscles. Mobility is when you're talking about joints. Flexibility is when you're talking about muscle. So that's the difference between the two. That's the actual definitions of them, that are passed down in movement science. And then stability is the ability to hold a joint in place as you do some other movement around it. So that's what those terms all mean.
Thank you. And just to rewind a little, what's your story in what led you to doing the work that you do now? Like, what is, Katy's story?
Oh, it's so long and involved, like any good stories, it's quite large. But if I had to make a bullet point timeline, or if I guess I could start with a summation, I do think that my pursuance of movement is twofold. One, I think psychologically, deeply, it comes from seeing the suffering that comes from immobility. I'm like a very rational, I process things rationally. I'm emotive. Like I have high emotional intelligence, but emotions aren't my primary way of keeping myself on course. Like people will have a lot of like, this makes me feel good, this makes me feel bad, this makes me feel upset, this makes me feel happy. Like I'm not oriented by that. I'm really oriented by this makes sense, that makes sense, type thing. So I have that as a personality trait. Another thing that I have, and you mentioned earlier this idea that I too believe like some people just come with high, if we looked at all the intelligences that people come with, whether they're musical or mathematical, or sometimes like people like there's a list of intelligence that they've identified. Some people are really good at sorting phyla and fauna, like classifications, like they just see the world in that way. And I think some people come with this high movement intelligence. I don't have that. What probably one of my intelligences, if we want to call it that, would be efficiency, big picture efficiency. And so, to the point, like I used to be a waitress. There's part of my story that's never going to be on it. Like I was a server for years and I loved it because it was a problem and efficiency to be solving all the time. Plus it was highly active, right? You're looking at this big, okay, I got to take this to that table, but I'm going to walk past that table. And there's a book called Cheaper by the Dozen, like a children's novel, where the scientist in that book is sort of obsessed with step count and minimizing and maximizing what he can get done in this period of time. And when I read that book, I'm like, I have that. Like even as a 12-year-old, I was like, I think in terms of that. So I think it's just a perfect storm of these sort of weirdo things that I come with just on my own.
We're all beautiful weirdos,
gifts, but we could call them my weirdo, right? It's just we're all, life is a circus. Some of us can fly a circus flag higher than others, but all of our blogs and podcasts, those are just flags. So anyway, I have that, plus seeing the suffering in my own life and the people around me that came from physical inflexibility, but I think even more deeply was the psychological inflexibility. And I think I overly connected those two things, and I've been trying to tease that apart. And that sort of personality was, I think, is the muse, if we're going to think of the Greeks. It was the muse that was overseeing my life as it went from, hey, studying math to studying physics as a pathway through school, in college. And then also my emerging transformation from being in a sedentary household to being like finding salvation in movement, like really opening up parts of myself and my psyche through just walking and then doing a sport and then training at the gym and then becoming a movement teacher. And then lockstep, I'm studying it at school. And now I'm, working in a fitness space and loving it and just seeing like, wow, people really need support. They need educated motivation, inspiration, modeling, and they need someone to be flexible in the way that they present it. The art of taking all of that knowledge that you have and converting it to how the person in front of you needs to hear it to find their key to motivation. And then 30 years later, here I am.
No, it's great. I mean, I always say to people, movement is like music. Like we're not all meant to be violinists. We're not all meant to be the drummer or the percussionist, but we can all find ways to move that we love and that feeds us and creating our own sustainable movement culture. And I know there was a lot of publicity around, I can't remember which article it was in or publication, but it was when I think you started to talk about having less furniture and less chair time and more sitting. And people are like, oh, this lady who doesn't like furniture and she's just lying on the floor all the time. So what is the reality to your everyday life around your environment and your movement?
Well, I think, again, back to that efficiency. To put yourself in an environment that does not support your overall values or interests, I just find that very inefficient. Like, why? And I talk about the healthy eating balance of it. Like, if you have made this choice, it's like, here is the way I'd like to nourish my body. You wouldn't keep a lot of other foods around that don't nourish this choice that you've made. And if you do, then either one, you've someone who's got really tremendous willpower, or you like that process of like talking yourself constantly through the guilt,
resistance,
shame, resist. Like, and I don't like those forces in my life. I just said I don't like, but I have found, like,
they don't
I
serve
try
me.
to decrease resistance overall. I try to increase positive mental speak. And so creating an environment that's more suited for me doing the things that I value, which would be using my hips and knees and other positions. It's certainly not resting. And I certainly don't just lie on the floor. The whole point is that there's numerous ways to take rest. They don't all have to be in one repetitive position. Again, it's back to that thought. Our thoughts around what it means to be still tend to involve a chair, but it doesn't take you don't need to get a very big global perspective to realize that the way we define taking rest and sitting down is sort of like outlying kind of strange habit. It's all around you. And so you normalize it in that way, but that doesn't make it a good behavior. It doesn't make it a good for you behavior. It just makes it something that you're used to. So yes, my normal day involves lots of sitting, but just not in one particular position. I might sit on the ball. I might sit on the floor. And I encounter plenty of regular chairs in my life as it is. It's sort of like candy. If you didn't want to eat candy and you got rid of all the candy in your house, you're like, that's great. Everywhere you go now has a bowl of candy just sitting out. So you're going to encounter it enough in your external life. There's no reason to build it into sort of your home, which is your sanctuary. It's the one space that you can really sculpt in the way that aligns with your value system. And my value system was my hips are up there. My hips and my knees and my ankles are up there. So I wanted to make sure that my home was nurturing them too.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people have these ideas that, as you said, like with movement educators, that they're living some kind of, like elite optimal life where everything is optimized all the time. And there's no like, well, they don't even have a sofa or there's not a chair and I think it's important to kind of bring it back to the reality of, as you say, we can kind of invite these things in and to not be like, what do you think, this lady doesn't ever sit on a chair? Like, of course, sometimes she sits on a chair. Yeah.
Sure. It's on a chair all the time. Like, my life looks very similar, I would imagine, to most lives of the people listening. Like, I get up in the morning. I do get up in the morning off of a floor bed, but I still get up in the morning and I have to make my bed. I just fold it up and put it away. And then I get my kids and argue with my kids and wash a gazillion dishes. And I take out the trash, and I am 47. So I have 32 small internal mental crises every single day as I am shifting in this phase of my life. But the difference is I have figured out that movement is a really good restorative tool for me. And I think it's a really good restorative tool for many people. And I've worked through the barriers, many barriers, and I have not had all the barriers that there are, but acknowledging all the other barriers that there are, as many of them as I can think of, and present them in my work, is those things become, I feel like I suffer less through them because I have the support system, and we are all using different support systems. And I've, worked through using support systems that support me in some ways, but don't support me in other ways. And again, the efficiency, it's like, I want the support with as little tax as possible, little physical tax as possible.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm the same. And, I was scared of moving. I had body parts that hurt. And then you feel like, well, I'm not really drawn to that kind of movement. And then I prefer this thing, but then the people who do it don't like this and that. And then I'm on my own. And now, like, can I just go back to just playing in the park and clambering over the stuff? And
you can't,
not
flexible, mentally flexible in that way.
Yeah. And I think giving ourselves permission, and for me, I like very playful movement. I like very creative, playful. If someone gives me lots of sets and reps, I'm immediately like, no.
Right.
You've
learned that about yourself.
Yeah. And that's just my journey and my tool. And it's like you say, if everyone is annoying you, that can just relate to the fact that maybe you've been sitting all day. I feel the same. And I've realized, and I think this tool of observation, these tools of listening, and you put this really beautifully about that, we have this kind of very ancient knowledge, which is out of sync with our modern living in this body, which has evolved to move in all these different ways. And yet it's just asking us all the time. So I've noticed, if I wear shoes all day, I'm a bit arsey. I'm a bit agitated. I don't feel at ease. And I've been wearing minimalist shoes for the last 10 years. These are really happy feet shoes. But even just shoes and even socks, it's gone to the point where socks bother me. And even out walking with a friend the other day, I was like, I'm just feeling really bothered. I don't know what it is. And I was like, I'm just gonna take my shoes off.
Right. Great.
And so I wanted to talk to you about walking as well. I'm a fan of the walk. I'm a fan of, and I've also learned so many things from your book about, I've never thought about my arm position when walking downhill. And I've thought about my calves or my foot position and this and that. And it's like, oh yeah, okay. And so this, I always share this idea that, awareness is the first step towards change, because it's really difficult to change something that you're not aware of. So where did your love affair with walking begin?
Probably when I was 18. Walking was the first movement. Yeah, it was the first movement that I stepped into, and it was a practical reason. I had no car. I think, my sister, we had a car accident, so we had no more car, and I had to get to school, and I was sort of, an angsty teen as we do, and I was just like, I'm just gonna walk, and I would walk, and it would probably take me 50 minutes to walk to school. But I felt great. I felt like, wow, I don't feel angsty when I do this. And I felt so good that when I got home after walking home from school, I would then ask if I could borrow a car, and I would drive to the beach, and then I would go walk for 2 more hours.
Nice.
And so, I feel like there might've been rumination at the beginning, but then I just would put music on, and I was like, I just love the way I feel. It was such a high dose of something that I hadn't had before, that I was really transformed. My mental state was transformed. Feeling really, a lot of it's so personal, and it doesn't really even matter because we've all been through that phase. So I just felt happy, and then I felt capable. My body felt great. My mind felt great. And so once I just went through that phase, I always would just take a walk for exercise. So that's one stage. I guess it did start as active transportation, and then it went into taking a walk for the physical benefits of it. And then it was probably not until, so that's like, my 18, 19, 20. And then I started to become a runner, and I was a runner for a long time. And then when I was about 25 or 26, I was like, why am I always driving to work? I was still driving to work. And it was the early, what would become the Nutritious Movement Center. It was called the Restorative Exercise Institute at that time. And I was like, I'm going to walk to work. And then once I started to walk to work, I was like, I should be doing this all the time. Like, again, it took me back to feeling good and having a little downtime, and get like, I could process more things. And it just felt some time to myself, time outside. It wasn't like moving my body from in my house to in the office. Like, I didn't have to go back and forth to those things. And then at that point, and then I met my husband, and we would just walk sometimes 7 or 8 miles as on a weekend, every day, just for a date. And I was like, I just love processing my life on foot, and it never went back, and it only increased from that point. And then, of course, I love mechanics, and walking is just one of those foundational movements to the human species. So breaking it down came up a lot in my schoolwork. And then I just sort of like, I know what all this is on paper because I've done it in my body. And so I just got to experiment a lot with different things.
I love that. And yeah, to embody the intellectual academic knowledge is just a motivator for passion about that, and to share it. And I mean, yeah, I'm a big fan of just the ease to make sense of the world when we walk. Like, you're upset, go for a walk. You want to celebrate something, go for a walk. You have a writer's block or a blank, go for a walk. And like, it's rare that going for a walk doesn't help. You never hear anyone feel like, unless they're like, I've walked too far, or my foot pain, or this or that. Like, it's rare for, going for a walk to ever be a negative in someone's life, I feel.
I've never regretted any walk that I've taken, and even the walks that I've become injured on. But a large part of my work is to get people to be able to walk comfortably, and not everyone has a physical ability to walk. And even just cultivating some sort of, like, whatever your movement joy is, when you don't feel the purpose of that essay in the book is when something feels off, and it feels like it has some sort of external reason about what other people are doing or about the state of your life, just pause for a second and do some physical activity. Walking is fast and inexpensive, but you can do pull-ups, do push-ups, roll around on the floor, turn on music at high volume and dance, go outside and jump around, like whatever it is, just do something for a second and see if you have not changed your, I mean, you've certainly changed your physical perspective, but see if you haven't also changed your mental perspective as well.
Definitely. I always think, if the mind's in a funk, send the body in for help. It's a team. Right. It's really a team. Like, it's really hard to fix the mind with the mind, but the body's always there, always kind of willing and ready. And how we move through the world, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, all these things are connected. And to have a whole body that is also connected within even the category of body, I think is something that you present really beautifully here. And, you say, I think it's, like with the calf or the ankle, like a calf stretch is never just a calf stretch.
No. And I think also we need some of my other books, I've talked about this more than in Rethink Your Position, that you had said, like, fix the mind by moving your body. And certainly in the moment we're looking at that problem, but also we don't really have a language around movement hunger. Like, I don't know if we would say fix your hanger, the anger that comes with hunger, fix your hanger by eating. We would have a different relationship. It's like, oh, I didn't have my need met. And that's why the emotional thing on the outside. So if you can think about movement more as a nutrient and something that you don't wait to get, and like to not always use it as medicine, right? We are at the point of movement as medicine because we tend to think about it after the issue has risen. If you can feed yourself and nourish yourself with movement before chaos ensues, that can be even like a smoother way of going, to recognize it as a need, not as a medicine. And of course, it doesn't diminish its medicinal effect, but imagine if all of your eating was done reactively.
It's never going to go
and
well.
You waited every time.
Exhausting.
And we're fluent in, some of us are fluent in hunger or nutrient, even like specific nutrients. Oh, I ate too much sugar. I've consumed too much, whatever, and I'm all off. Once you can really understand how movement works in that same way, you will hear signals from yourself differently. Instead of I don't feel good, you will be more fluent in your own body to realize you haven't put your feet on the ground. I have my daughter, she has to hang. She has signals for hanging from her arms. And the way it comes across is like, I can't sleep. I'm just so like my shoulder, she gets the equivalent to restless leg syndrome, but in her arms. But once, you realize what that is, then you don't have to go through the phase of the difficult.
You don't have to stay with agitation.
You don't have to be agitated to begin with. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's, again, this listening and self-knowledge, but then always knowing, well, what to do, what's next. And then for me, I'm a kind of slacker. Like if things are really like too much effort, I don't do them. I'm just like, nah, like I'm not a perfectionist. I'm a kind of slacker high achiever. I look at some of my projects, I'm like, it's really kind of against the odds that I even finished that. That's remarkable because there's always, I'm a kind of movement hedonist, and I like to do movements that feel good. And I'm also curious about movements that give me an emotional reaction. So like deep squats used to just, and like overhead back squats, like they used to just make me cry. Doing bunny hops with a wide leg or a kind of frog, I was like, it just upsets me. It makes me angry. It makes me upset, and I don't like them. And it was because my body was not at ease in those positions. I didn't have access to them, and it brought up so many things. And then it's like, well, I'm shit at that, therefore I'm a shit person. I'm just a waste of space. Right. So I had all these identity stories tied in to a movement pattern where when I was kind of invited to explore it in different ways, and when I was given a different road in, when I was given a different access point, which didn't involve immediate suffering or shame or overheating, or I would be doing some quadrupedy stuff in parkour classes and I would just be crying and dying. And I remember one coach said to the group one time, like, hey guys, how do you feel? Look at me, I'm smiling. And my friend just went, angry.
Yeah.
And it was like, that's so honest.
Yeah. Great.
And for us to be really honest about our movement patterns and the interconnectedness of it. So I wanted to ask you about calf hearts. I loved this, and I don't think people know about this. So I wanted you to particularly share this on the podcast. So can you give us a brief overview of our calves, our calf heart, our heart, and us overall?
Okay, just sum that up quickly. So the calves are the muscles in the back of your lower leg, and one of our, everyone always wants to know, like, what's the one exercise, or the three things I should be doing. And we're very much like, I hear what you're saying, distill it into something I could do for 1 minute a day, which of course is always a challenge. But if I had to do that, this particular calf stretch, it's not generally just stretch your calves. It's look at the way your calves move when you take a step and measure what range of motion they have available to them, which is both the joint mobility and the muscle flexibility. And so we have a particular exercise that helps you measure that. And then also in doing it becomes the stretch, the thing that helps mobilize that area. Great. So why is it so important? It's important because cardiovascularly, if we think about our cardiovascular system, the model that we use is we've got this heart, and the heart is the main thing, the main muscle that is pumping everything throughout our body. And I went into this more in Move Your DNA, where there's lots of diagrams and talking about really it's the musculoskeletal system that works in partnership with the heart that pulls blood, that not only moves blood throughout your body, but pulls it into where you can actually use it, which is in the capillary system. You're not using you're not using blood that's sitting in the arteries. It has to diffuse and move into the series of smaller vessels to park those individual oxygen molecules into the driveway. A bunch of oxygen on the main highway doesn't get anything to your house, and every cell.
It's like the snowplow only clears the main road. It's like, I'm still stuck at home.
And so
Can't get the car out the drive. Yeah.
Right. And so we need each musculoskeletal muscle needs to do its own movement to create a vacuum, to draw the blood in. So there's that phenomenon. Why the calves, though, is it's easy to get your blood down. It's easy for it to go down. It's harder for it to come back up. A big part of the pumping mechanism of getting the blood up the legs is the action of the calf muscles. That action, that rhythmic action, works with these little flaps that are inside your veins that sort of walk the blood up in step.
Here you go. Up you go. Up you go.
It's right. And so in the absence of all this calf muscle activity, the veins have to go it alone, and they can't adapt to in this body, we have to go it alone. So we're going to get stronger valve flaps. You don't get that. We all get the same valve flaps. And so you end up having vein difficulties, and then your heart has to now do extra work because the skeletal muscles, the rest of the skeletal muscles are just they're not doing anything. Your heart's usually beating when you're sitting, and you're not really doing any sort of movement. And so the heart is just sitting there going it alone. So when you take a step, for every step that you take, those are support steps to your heart to get the blood going up and around. But for many of us, our steps don't use very much calf muscle contraction, which is really key to getting the blood out of the lower legs. Our calves are very stiff. Our calves are stiff for two reasons. One, because we sit a lot. So when you sit with your knee flexed to 90 degrees, that shortens the calf. Also, wearing a positive heeled shoe where the heel is elevated, that also shortens the calf. So if you've been sitting and wearing a positive heeled shoe for a long portion of your life, which is almost all of us, you end up with calf pumps that aren't even able to really go through their full range of motion. So the calf stretch is that one movement that not only affects your ankles and your knees and your hips and your low back, it also lets you better support your heart with every step that you take after you do it. So it's one of those stretches that pays off a lot over time throughout the rest of the day.
I love that. And also this transfer of this idea of what movement does for our brain. And this section of the book really, it really touches my heart. And I love that, you did a book about dynamic aging, and positive aging is a subject that's really dear to me, and also neurodegenerative health. And as we kind of, navigate perimenopause, I'm in menopause, and all of those things that we're kind of learning of, we know movement's good for us. We know movement's good for the brain, but we know a kind of few more things in a few more details. So you kind of list 4 different things about that. So can you talk a little bit about our feet on the ground? Why does barefoot matter?
Or just, it doesn't have to be barefoot. You're talking about foot strike in this case? Yes. So it doesn't have to be barefoot. It's that the impact of exercise, why is exercise good for us? For so many different reasons, in so many different physiological pathways. I love the nuance of movement. So in this section that you're talking about is the impact of your foot on the ground is part of the mechanical environment. It creates a set of forces, and those forces end up pushing blood up towards the brain. So does chewing. That's another
I know. Yeah.
into that one. But as far as foot strike, the brain, I mean, if you just go back to thinking about, our software is so very old, and this environment is quite modern.
Mhm.
And so your body cannot catch up. I mean, it's only very recently that we've been in environments that would not have us walking around.
Mhm.
for
It's a
tremendous amount of
mismatch.
time.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, so it's environmental or evolutionary mismatch is the term that's summing up what I'm trying to explain. Is just this idea that a body would not survive in earlier times if it was not able to ambulate or move around. And we've come a lot of ways. We have a lot of supportive elements, but our brain still sort of depends on getting the blood that it needs. And the mechanism for getting the blood that it needs right now is really dependent on movement of our whole body. So foot strike is one of the biggest shunting mechanisms of blood up to the brain. So if you're swimming or if you're cycling, those are still good movements, but it wouldn't necessarily meet this shunting mechanism because it's just about a shock wave, when you hit the ground with your foot. Now, the more cushioned your shoes are, right, the less impact you're going to have. If you're in something that's a little bit more minimal, the greater shock wave you're going to have. And it's not that you want to walk around banging your feet on the ground, because there actually is too much doesn't get it up there either. Too little doesn't get it up there. It's just probably more
So
the
we're not
natural
talking about a
state.
traumatic like stomp in your feet. I mean,
Yeah,
in my sister's house, like the way the people they walk around the kitchen, I'm always like, you guys walk like elephants. It's just
yeah. No, harder is not better. There's just, again, it always goes back to moderation, which is to find the right amount. And the right amount would just be, your casual walking strike that you get. So yeah, it's just, I talked about that at I was on a women's and Alzheimer's panel and was just talking about the nuance of movement, because movement is quite protective of brain health, but again, it's not necessarily clear why. And it's often presented as, so that's why you should exercise, 3 times a week for 30 minutes. It always reduces it back to that little prescriptive formula, which doesn't work for so many people. So just trying to expand to say, well, here's all the ways that you could be thinking about movement so that you can meet your brain's need for movement. We're not meeting our brain's need for movement. It's not only the shoulders need for movement and the hips, like we're not meeting that basic need. And when you think about it this way, it's like, that's what you're moving for now, right? Is to feed your body the movement that it requires.
Absolutely. And this whole approach to, having this nutritious 360 degrees type approach of whole body, of having a movement as a nutrient rich environment, and thinking outside, like you say, thinking outside of the exercise box and expanding the language and possibilities. So where can people find more about your work, what you do? And also I want to know, and you've kind of hinted a little bit, but like, what are you doing? What's kind of in Katy's arena of inspiration and ideas at the moment?
You can find me at nutritiousmovement.com. That's the website. And then if you do social media, at Nutritious Movement on Instagram and Facebook. I have a podcast, Move Your DNA podcast. So for people who like listening to podcasts, that's a good way to look at. I mean, there's 5 years worth of episodes of just playing with the nuance of exercise. I mean, all the topics are there, not just exercise, movement as well. And what's next? I'm working on a project about the psychology
Fantastic.
of movement to help you to look at the issues that are coming up for you when you're not able to get the movement that you want, and break them down with the help of some more psychological tools. And I'm partnering with a psychologist that I love on this particular book. So that's going to be
exciting.
And then also I'm working on a project about, in the same way that I was able to tease out exercise and physical activity from movement for the general public, pulling in the other topic of labor. Labor is another movement category that most of us have mental blocks around, in that we've been taught that it's something to avoid or minimize, or have been passed on the tradition of avoiding it or minimizing it, and to start pulling it out and reframing it in the same way. It's like, let's look at labor in a way that doesn't have such a negative mental construct for us, because it is a way of engaging in movement. Like, and not just like doing your own housework, your own yard work, your own food preparation, maybe some of your own food cultivation, or supporting community gardens or farming gardens. And just to recognize that if we talk about mismatch, people not doing their own labor, that's maybe one of the biggest mismatches of all. Right?
Outsourcing life.
Outsourcing the physical movements that were associated with our consumables. And so, like, bringing that, I did a little bit in Movement Matters, but it will be teased out,
expansive,
and put all together, so that we can see, like, oh, I can see when I want to choose exercise,
when
I want to choose physical activity, when I want to choose labor, and to really just have this guidance to nutritious movement, or movement as a nutrient, is really what it is overall. That's
absolutely. Like, I love.
No promises on when that's coming.
Oh yeah, no, work in progress. And what are you doing for fun these days?
Thank you for asking. What am I doing for fun? Those questions are always so hard for me to ask. It's camping and backpacking season. So getting outside. I have 2 blossoming teenagers. And so I'm really committed to giving them my attention, doing some teaching in the schools here, being able to bring the skill set of offering different portals to movement, but into the public school system in different ways. I'm working on that as well.
Sounds like beautiful work. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time today. And thank you for your work, your contribution to knowledge, your entry points for so many people to start thinking about, how can I move? Why does it hurt? What can I do next? So thank you, Katy. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.